It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm still a Dutch person, although I've been living for now over 8 years in Germany. And it's always a pleasure to be back in the Netherlands. But for the people that are not Dutch, I should warn you, like the rest of the country is very different from here, from Amsterdam. So let me dive into the topic. As Kjeld has indicated, I'm typically known as the Godfather of Process Mining. I will tell a bit more about that later. But when in the beginning people were raising their hands, what are the topics that you are working on? And we heard things like vision and robotics and all of these typical things. But what always surprises me is that any organization has processes, end-to-end processes, right? They typically produce something, they buy stuff. So any organization has processes, that's one thing. And any organization has lots of data, right? So most of the larger organizations here in Europe are using, for example, SAP or Oracle or something like that. So process and data are there in any organization. And still, when people talk about AI, they typically talk very much about trying to optimize one step in the process rather than end-to-end processes. So I would like to talk to you about the topic of process mining. I will talk about the latest developments, and I will say how that relates to AI. So if I'm using ChatGPT and everybody in the room is using that, and I'm a manager of a company, I could ask, how can I improve my OTIF score? So OTIF means on time in full. So that's the percentage of orders that you're able to deliver in time and complete, right? And if I ask that ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the other things, it starts spitting out pages of text. And then you ask the question, how can you spit out all of this text? Because I did not tell you anything about my process. I did not give you any data, and still it is generating this. And I think the gap between what is reality and what people expect, I think that gap has become way too wide. And process mining is the technology to bring that closer together. So process mining, I will show that if at an organizational level you would like to apply AI, not for automating a single task, but for, let's say, improving your end-to-end processes, that you need to use process mining. Otherwise, you have no chance of applying AI. And the latest innovation in our field, and it's very much a topic that I've been driving, is object-centric process mining, and I will briefly give you some pointers to that topic. So let me first introduce process mining. So who had heard about process mining before in the audience, right? And that's very depressing, right? For the reasons that I just indicated to you. It is also one of the technologies that has a much larger adoption in industry than people are aware of, right? If I would ask who has heard about simulation or something like that, everybody would have raised his hand. Anybody doing an MBA or something like that gets to see all of these things, but they are never used in practice. But these are technologies that are used in practice because it is very close to, let's say, the problems that people have. So what you see here is a table, and that table is indicating event data, so things that have happened, right? And you can imagine, so if you look at this data, it's not important that you're able to read it. For example, a customer makes a payment, or you are ordering some products from a supplier, or you go to a hospital and you take an X-ray of a patient, or you go to e-learning and a student takes an assignment, right? So all of these things are examples of events. And for every event, to do process mining, the minimal information that you need to know is that from an event, you need to know when it has happened, right? Like a timestamp, right? And just look at your information systems, whether you're a hospital, whether you're a logistics organization, whether you're producing cars, all of your data is timestamped, right? So there are timestamps everywhere. For every event, you should also know the activity, what has happened, and you should know what it is about, right? And this is classical, what we call case-centric process mining, because for every event, we relate it to a case. And I'm sure that some of you have, are familiar with notations like BPMN or UML activity diagrams or something similar. You typically draw a flow chart, And the case is the thing that is flowing through the flowchart. So it could be the patient, it could be the student, it could be the order, whatever application you look at. So with this information, you can automatically generate process maps. So this is what is called process discovery. And if you look at the most frequent behavior, then you see something that we call the happy path, right? So in most organizations, if you're, let's say, processing cases, then the most frequent path through your process, if you're doing things properly, is also the thing that you would like to see. But of course, you know that, for example, if you look at handling orders, there are things like price changes. So the supplier may have changed the price, and for that you are going through an additional loop. Things may not be available, etc., etc. So this is, if people would be drawing, let's say, process models by hand, this is what they typically draw, right? So a relatively simple diagram that looks a bit like this. So the boxes are activities, and the arrows are describing in what order these things can happen. And then if you look at real life data, then it always looks like this, right? And that's, like I just returned from Australia. There, Queensland Health is one of our, let's say, customers. And Queensland Health, if they are ordering, for example, things like a glove or something like that, there are 80,000 different ways of doing it, right? So, but people are talking about, I don't know what they do, they talk at this level, but then you start looking at reality, and there are tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands different ways of doing this, right? And that shows that if you would like to improve these processes, you cannot ask ChatGPT, or you cannot ask people how should we improve. You need to look at the actual data. So I think most of you are familiar with the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule is something that you see in most processes. So if I would look at 80% of the cases, 80% of the orders, they fit into a relatively simple process model. But then if I would like to add the remaining 20%, right, we get this spaghetti-like diagram, right? So traditionally people would say, okay, I'm happy, right, with this model. I am covering 80% of the cases, so let's try to improve this in some way. But they're making a big mistake, and that's the reason why most, let's say, workflow management initiatives, for example, completely failed. The reason is that all of your problems and all of your inefficiencies, they are not in this model on the left. They're in the model on the right. So if you're doing process mining, if you want to improve processes, you should be open to look at reality, right? And you don't get this reality by looking at the bar chart or by having a workshop or something like that. That will always fail. So this is the basic idea of process mining if I talk to you about it bottom up. But now I talk about it top down. So the basic idea is that you extract event data from enterprise systems. And this is very, very complicated, right? So if you are dealing with a system like SAP, you have hundreds of thousands of tables, right? And you need to decide which are the ones that I need to do. 2 years ago, I was talking to a CIO of a US bank, and he was very proud that since he was CIO, he managed to reduce the number of information systems down to 800, right? So then you can see the complexity of reality, right? And if you're not willing to face reality, there is not much meaningful things that you can do because you will circle around the same problems always. So extracting the data is far from trivial, but for known systems, like for example SAP, we have been developing, let's say, standard extractors that extract data if you're interested in specific, let's say, processes. Then after extracting it, you just push a button and you see what is really going on, as I just showed you with discovery, right? So you create transparency and you can look at what is the mainstream and what are these dirt roads, and not the highways in your process, but the dirt roads that cause all the problems that you're continuously facing. Then after the first shock, and I've been doing this now for over 25 years, the first shock is always, I've been in many rooms with companies showing them their processes, typically the jaws of people drop, right? They say, is this my process? They don't believe this is their process. But using process mining, you can always drill down and you can look at the actual case and you can see, yeah, this really happened, right? Look up this patient and you can see this is actually the thing that happened to this patient or to this order. Then after the first shock, you create a normative process connected to the data that tells you where are your biggest execution gaps. And it's data-driven, right? It's based on facts. And for every execution gap, so for every problem where reality is very different from what you would like to see, you can generate triggers, right? And you can make it visible where these problems are and how frequent they are. If you have enough data, and this is of course where the link to AI comes into play, if you have enough data, process mining is also the technology that allows you to generate machine learning problems over these execution gaps. And you cannot do that without first knowing the process and where your problems are, right? You first need to do that. And of course, very important, any of these insights that you're generating should always lead to actions. And if you, for example, look at our, let's say, commercial software, right, we typically trigger workflows that can connect to over 1,000 systems. SAP would be one of them. And you would be able to automatically, the moment that you see a problem, you can take actions to try to address it. So this is showing a timeline. It's not important that you can read it a lot in detail, but I just want to point out using this, that this started like a small research project here at the University of Eindhoven in the south of the Netherlands. At the time that nobody was looking at this connection between process and data, although it is completely logical. And this evolved into, let's say, a separate market segment, right? There are over 50 commercially available process mining tools that are able to do these types of things. Also, all the analyst firms see it as let's say, a new technology, and there are also dedicated conferences. Also, if you would go to any, let's say, business process management conference these days, over half of the papers will be about process mining. Right? So on Sunday, I will go to Seville. There is the International Conference on Business Process Management. And again, over half of the papers are on process mining, which is completely logical if you think about it. So, as was said at the beginning, I'm typically called the Godfather. Is that because I'm so incredibly smart? I don't think so. The reason was that the first 10 years, I was basically alone, right? So I had from the end of the 90s and then the first 10 years, me and my students, we had the possibilities to let's say, explore this area, and we were able to develop the first process discovery techniques, the first conformance checking techniques, the first techniques to predict, let's say, inefficiencies, problems, etc., etc. Another interesting statistic, so we like to talk about AI, and there is a problem that we have here in Europe, that we have very few, let's say, big IT and software companies. If you look at this chart that came out, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, this is, let's say, listing the most valuable private companies, and you could take this with a grain of salt, but there are just 2 European companies in this chart. One is Klarna, and the other one is Celonis, right? So these are the only 2 companies in Europe playing a role. And this is to show just for the significance of and the opportunities that we have here in Europe. It is very difficult to compete with OpenAI and these types of things. But if we talk about processes, like other parts of the world have, let's say, the opportunity to make a difference there. As I said, process mining is now a separate market segment. There are around 50 tools. So for example, Gartner, one of the analyst firms, but they are all doing that. They are spitting out reports each year, like what are the tools and how are they doing, etc., etc. If you look at the last report from a couple of months ago of Gartner, it's highlighting 2 things. AI, the connection between process and AI is very important. logical. And the other thing that it highlights is object-centric process mining as the key technology to look at more complicated use cases, right? And this is exactly one of the research that I've been pushing, let's say, over the last couple of years. So now I move to object-centric process mining. And I cannot explain to you it in all detail, but I can try to give you the idea. So earlier, we had a very similar chart, and we said an event is a case, an activity, and a timestamp. But we now relax it that an event can refer to any number of objects, right? That's a generalization. And objects can be customers, items, it can be a doctor, it can be an X-ray machine. So it's a very general notion. So again, this is something that's completely logical to do. But still, for those of you that have been doing process modeling, you realize that you're always caught into making a flowchart that is about something, right? It's always about the flow of the patient, the flow of the order. And what this is showing is that like you need to generalize that, and you need to get out of this kind of standard things of doing this. So earlier I showed you spaghetti-like diagrams. And if we talk about object-centric process mining, we are actually showing that the spaghetti is colored, that there are different types of objects interacting with each other. So for example, all the Western car manufacturers are using process mining to optimize their production processes. And if I order a car, when I order the car, some parts of the car have already been manufactured, which shows that you cannot have it like a flowchart that says, okay, now I order my car and now everything starts in a sequence. No, there are many objects. Some of them already exist. You are dealing with machines, suppliers, and all of these things. Another, so Lufthansa is one of our customers. So for example, if you so did they use it for the boarding processes like procurement and these types of things. They also use it, let's say, to track lost baggage. That's something that you can relate more to. But they are also using it, for example, in Frankfurt and Munich to minimize delays at the airport. And I do not have time to explain, let's say, this use case in detail, but at an airport, an amazing number of events are being recorded, right? Baggage is checked in, passengers are boarding, and all of these things are events. And you can analyze these events to understand in real time what is causing delays, right? And I hope that this picture kind of puts in your mind, it is not just the case, how does a passenger flow through it? No, it's much more complicated. We are dealing with passengers, we are dealing with suitcases, we are dealing with the cleaning crew, we are dealing with people that first are at the check-in desk and later are at the gate, etc., etc. So this complexity, to really improve this and to really understand these processes, you need to do case-centric. To sketch it in an example that you can more relate to, as I said, I do not have time to explain this in a lot of detail. You can all imagine that you are ordering stuff from Amazon. In Amazon, in one order, there can be multiple items, right? And I think everybody also has experienced that sometimes you order 5 things or 3 things in one order, but they are not all delivered at the same time. So some things are delivered the next day, other things are delivered 2 weeks later. It can also be the case that if you receive like a package from Amazon, that in the package there are items that are belonging to different orders, right? You ordered them at different points in time, but they are delivered in the same package. So now think about this in a process sense. Like, can we now say this is the case flowing through it? No, because we are dealing with orders, items, and packages. So this is the complexity that if you do object-centric process mining is trying to address. And it's also, if people are modeling in BPMN, they are kind of caught in thinking in terms of a single case. Well, reality is much more complicated. So if I would focus on orders separately in blue, I would focus on items in red, and in green, I would focus on the packages. Like these processes would be very simple. but it would not tell me anything. So for example, earlier we asked ourselves, what is the OTIF score, on time in full? And for that, I need to look at the order, the items that are in the order, and the packages that are delivered at the end. And I need to look at all of them to really understand that. As I said, I do not have time to explain this in detail, but object-centric process mining discovers then process models that show the interaction between these different types of objects. And that is the only way to understand why production is not performing the way that it does, why at airports you have certain delays. Just one thing has to go wrong and everything gets delayed, right? And you're capturing that in this way. So that has been one of the main drivers in our, let's say, research in the last couple of years. And being the chief scientist at Celonis, which is this only German company in this chart that I showed before, based on this research, kind of the whole Celonis platform is now completely object-centric, right? It's the only commercial tool that is going from case-centric to this more, let's say, realistic thing. So we are loading the data in this way. We can discover process models. We can compute, let's say, compliance values. We can understand deviations. So for example, here you see the different colors are referring to different object types. And for example, you see highlighted where are the biggest execution gaps in your process. Also, if you look at something like OTIF, like the OTIF score, the time between placing an order and the last item being delivered, you can see that you can only answer these types of questions by looking at multiple objects at the same time, right? And this gives a visual impression of what the tools look like. So you do not model anything, right? You are automatically discovering these processes, and then you can see, let's say, where your biggest problems are. So this is very important for 3 reasons. You extract the data as they really happen. So you only need to go back to your SAP system or whatever once. You avoid distortions by not squeezing everything into a single case notion. And most of the problems that we are talking about involve multiple objects. Think about an airport, think about, let's say, some logistic process, think about production, and that's obvious. So object-centric is providing the context to be able to do AI. And now I would like to go back to the question that I showed at the beginning, right? So we asked this question, we only get a bullshit answer. So using process mining, you can see where are your deviations, where are you losing your customers, where are the bottlenecks. And for each of these problems, you can generate automatically a machine learning problem. And then you can only analyze it. So without, let's say, process mining, you cannot do that. And this is very similar to so we all would like to have like a chat-like interface, asking us how can we improve our processes. But for those of you that have been looking at this, let's say, before, if you were using ChatGPT in the beginning, it would not be able to answer this question. What is 111 plus 222? Today it can do it because it is using a calculator, right? If you're asking a process-related question, you need to use a process calculator, right? And using process mining technology, this is exactly what we are doing. So we are also offering, let's say, a ChatGPT-like interfaces, as you see here, where in natural language you are interacting with the process mining software, but the results are based on facts, their actual computation. To come to an end, so I hope, like in the beginning, very few people raise their hand that they know that they did not know about process mining. I hope that you see that this is a problem, right? That there are huge opportunities also for this audience to do super interesting things here. The benefits are undeniable. If we look, however, at industry, not so much relating to you as researchers, like this is what we often encounter, right? People are looking for an easy solution. But there is no easy solution. You cannot claim that you are too busy while still let's say, handling your processes in the old way. So my own university finally started doing process mining. But just as an illustration, if I'm traveling as an academic, it takes half a year to reimburse my traveling costs, right? And I think many people are smiling, they recognize this. So let's stop talking about very advanced applications while these basic things are not right yet. So I hope I explained to you why this field is relevant and why it provides many opportunities to also bring AI and machine learning to, let's say, processes in real organizations. Thank you very much.
Heel van der Aalst!